let's talk about our sponsor, PetrolBox. PetrolBox is a monthly service made specifically for the automotive enthusiast. May that be you or a car guy, car girl in your life. Makes a great gift, as I always say. Each and every month, they carefully select items from the industry, be it garage gear, tools, apparel. Usually you always get a t-shirt. You always get some really cool, unique enamel pins, and then detailing supplies almost every month. You get detailing supplies along with a tool that goes with the detailing supplies, in addition to some other either gadget or like innovation in the garage or in the automotive industry, I guess is the best way to say it. So really cool. Every single month is unique. It's an awesome, if you've ever done any sort of subscription service, this is, I think, one of the most fun for myself. And I think a lot of our listeners who are definitely into cars and automotive culture. So check those guys out at mypetrolbox.com. Subscriptions start as low as $19.95 a month. You can also get the PetrolBox Premium, which is even more gear for $39.95 a month. And if you are going to do that, please use the code OVERCREST, because that'll get you $6 off your order. All right, that's mypetrolbox.com.
Mr. Thomas Walk, it's really amazing to have you here. And in a high frame rate, this is like take 3 of trying to get you to sun. Seems like it's working really well. It's my pleasure to have you here. I'm super excited to talk to you, and it's been a long time coming. It's good to have a catalyst to finally chat.
Absolutely, dude. I am thrilled to be on my very first podcast, and yeah, super excited to be talking.
So I'm super interested in this book that you guys came out with. And I want to talk about a lot of different things with you, but I'm as somebody who has dealt with the Porsche archive. Like, I've dealt with the Porsche archive before. I've had them on the phone. I've had to email them. It is this enigma, this bunkerized place that has gotten harder and harder and harder to talk to, harder to get to deal with. And I know they have like an amazing, incredible. I mean, you call the guy up and you'd be like, "Hey, man, I need a photo of." For example, this is a project I had really worked on. I need a photo of the Hawaiian Tropic 935 from Le Mans in, I don't remember what year it was, the Paul Newman car. I'm missing some photos. I'd love to see it in the Apple livery and do different things. And the guy's like, "Yeah, I'll get back to you." And then it's like 2 weeks later, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I found like these photos or whatever. And do you have more?" And they're just so busy over there. I think they have a lot to go through. I'm really excited to see your insight about what that place was like. How did you start this journey towards this book? Where did it begin?
Artifacts originally began as sort of it was born out of pure sort of like curiosity. This was back in 2021, and I was scrolling Instagram as you do, and I stumbled across an Instagram story of a journalist I follow who was in the archives, and he posted a bunch of photos of it. And up to that point, I never really knew what the archives looked like. I knew that they existed, but I never really knew what they really looked like or what was in there. And out of those a few snapshots that I got to see on Instagram, I began sort of like obsessed. I was like, wow, like I would love to really know more. And it was really, at that point, I wasn't thinking, taking photos, making a book. I was just really, really sort of curious. And back in 2021, of course, was, COVID times, and, we were spending a lot of time at home. And I kind of sat with this idea of curiosity for a bit. And then came the idea of like, it would be amazing to go in there and to take portraits of some of these items and to try to capture them at a really intimate level. And to also portrait them.
Why did you want to do that? Why was that important to you? What was it about that kind of made you go, I need to get in there, I need to do it?
Well, again, it was just curiosity. I really just was curious about, what was in there, what were they keeping in there, and and I'm a big fan of like textures.
So you
So
didn't know the scope of everything that was there, right? Ahead of time, you didn't know
no,
the scope. You didn't know how deep it was and where the rabbit hole went. You're
no.
standing above the rabbit hole, going, "What's in that dark place?"
Exactly. I caught a glimpse and I was like, okay, you know, and then I kind of sat on the idea for a bit. And then we started talking amongst ourselves at ERG Media about, you know, what would a photographic project with the archives look like? And there was no real, you know, idea to make it a book or anything, but we really felt like it hasn't been done before. Like the archives has not been documented that way before. So we started putting together little decks and, you know, started to toy around with the idea. And then eventually we were like, well, let's just pitch it. Let's see what can come of this. Like, let's see if we can talk to the right folks. And, next thing you
Right.
know, we're talking to Frank and
What? So
Yo.
up until this point, what were you using the Porsche archives for? Like, what was your interaction with them like?
Nil. I had no idea who ran the archives. I had no idea what they did. I just, like I said, I had a very small idea of what they were responsible for, and I knew to a small degree that they existed, but again, it was just pure, innocent like curiosity. I just really was curious to see what we could do if we got in there, and so we put together this deck, this big elaborate deck on, you know, what would we do if we had access to photograph the items in the archives. And over the course of a year, we sort of like, you know, started talking to the right folks. And I'm not sure if you remember, but 2021, like I couldn't leave, I could not get out of Australia. So it was not even a question. And again, there were a lot of restrictions with COVID, and you know, so this was a concept that we weren't too sure if we would ever be able to execute. We were just kind of like, you know, playing around with this idea and exploring it. And eventually we got talking to the right folks, which happened to be Frank and Jörg, who are responsible for the archives. And we got talking, and they right away sensed that we were enthusiasts like they were, and that we were on the right page with what we wanted to do. And we produced it over the course of 6 months, and as soon as I was able to, I got on the plane to Germany and went for it. That's pretty much it.
Okay, so what is this? Where is this place? What do they keep there? And
Right.
what was it like when you got there?
So you can imagine that it was almost a religious experience when I got there. It was almost like, like going to the Sixtine Chapel. It was so surreal. But the bulk of the archives, so the way that I like to explain the archives to folks who ask me, what it was like there, is that you've got two main rooms right underneath the Porsche Museum, and these are air-controlled rooms with airtight doors and argon gas vents, and so that's kind of where they keep the bulk of it. But the truth is that the archives in reality is spread out all over Zuffenhausen, throughout like different buildings. The archives didn't really start, as far as I know, until the late 80s, early 90s. So you can imagine they had quite a lot of catching up to do up to that point, and it was spread out kind of everywhere. So it is the full-time job of a handful of employees who are dedicated to the cause of preserving the history of Porsche, to sort through all this stuff that they've accumulated across like over a number of years, and to put them in the right place and to digitize them. And so it is quite overwhelming. When I first got there, I thought
How many people are doing this?
I want to say there's a solid team of about 20 people. I maybe, again, don't quote me on this. I want to say this is what I remember. I think it's about 15 to 20 people who are solely dedicated to running the archives, and that's pretty much for everything from doing research services for guys like you who want to find photos of cars, and to guys who are
Yep.
like finding like folders covered in dust and need to put them in the right place. So it's kind of a skeleton crew as far as teams within Porsche are concerned. It's kind of like a very small dedicated group of people who run the archives. And when I first got there, I thought I I knew that there would, you know, after talking to Frank and to Jörg for a number of months, I knew about the two main rooms, and I knew that that's going to be where the bulk of what we were going to shoot was going to live. Um, but then, as I quickly discovered, there's a lot more to it, and it's quite overwhelming, as you can imagine. It's you really you think you know what you're in for, and then you walk into a room and it is just shelves and like upon shelves of stuff that is, it's just incredible, and it's quite emotional as a fan of the brand. You feel like you've kind of like stumbled onto a treasure trove, and that no one's looked at before. Um, and yeah,
Well, much
it's
of it nobody has looked at before. The amount of stuff that they have, I'm just imagining. I'm imagining. Have you seen The Matrix, the
right.
movie?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
You know
Yeah,
where Neo goes, I need guns, lots and lots of
lots of
guns, and then
guns. Yeah,
the thing goes, and there's like guns flying by. That's what I'm
yeah,
imagining it was like. You're walking in there, and there's just the absolute monumental. Like, how did you even? I
yeah.
mean,
I
when you
mean,
got
look,
there, you just must have been just okay. Where do I even start?
absolutely. And we tried to do that over the phone, and I could see in their eyes that they were like, "We can try," but you'll never know until you get here. Like this is how you have to do it. Like you have to come here and you have to like pick things for yourself, because you could, we were trying to describe the things that we wanted access to and to photograph, and of course we wanted to also photograph the items with, good backstories. We also wanted to photograph stuff that people may not have seen before. Um, and so we tried to do that over the phone over a few months. And the conclusion was, yeah, you better come here, and you better you just have a look, and you just make that decision for yourself. And sure enough, we got there, and it took us. I think on the schedule we had like 3 days to go through like all the rooms that we had access to,
Okay, so you
and
probably had like, okay, so you guys discussed over the phone. You're like, yeah, we're gonna look at this, we're gonna look at that, but there must
right.
have been some discovery too. Like you
Oh yeah.
open up a drawer and you're like, oh my god, what was the biggest? What were some of those moments like where you discovered something? Talk about discovery at this place.
Look, having never been face to face with any of the things that I had shot, the whole thing was a discovery. Um, what I didn't expect was, the initial concept behind the book, or behind what it was before until it became a book, was that we were just going to photograph the items. It was just going to be about the items. And then after we did our 3 day recce of the archives, it became really obvious to me that like the rooms themselves had a real presence, and when you walked in there, you really felt as if you were in some sort of church, and there was really this incredible feeling that we felt when we were in those rooms looking for the stuff that we photographed. And so in a very late stage of the project, we decided, hey, we better try to capture these rooms and try to represent them and try to capture them in a way that makes people feel the way we felt when we were in there. So there were a lot of I think we had like one day where we ran around with tripods and cameras, try to just capture details of these rooms and to include them inside the book. Um,
Do you think the rooms were special because of just the way that of the people that were working there kind of curated the space on purpose or accidentally, or how do these spaces become special?
no,
Like
these are
with
very
nothing in them, are they special spaces?
no, probably not. I mean, you walk into storage room one in the Porsche Museum, and there's a middle shelf that splits the room into two, and there are just scale models along that entire shelf, and you just you feel like you're in the presence of history. It's a very personal experience. Like as a Porsche fan, you know that you're at the Mecca. Like this is where the whole like this is the memory bank of the brand. This is where it all is. So there's an incredible presence in these rooms. It's almost sort of haunting. Try not to get too like almost like dramatic. But yeah, you're walking around.
Well, think
like,
about it in terms of like imagine you're not a Porsche fan, right? Imagine that you're just a guy. You know,
Right.
you're just a guy. You're a photographer. You're Thomas Walk that doesn't own a Porsche. Maybe you're a fan of maybe you like British cars by some
Right.
mistake in your life. You're a big British car fan by some horrible thing that happened to you as a child, and you walk into this place, not even as a Porsche fan. What makes these rooms special? What is it about these rooms that would impress upon even somebody that doesn't care about Porsche that you're somewhere special?
I mean, if I had to pick the one thing, I would say that it doesn't take long for you to realize how much history is kept there. So, you don't have to be a fan of like Leonardo da Vinci to go to a museum where his stuff is kept and be blown away. Just the amount of engineering that is represented in these rooms, like the amount of research, the amount of, you know, there's a lot of history in those rooms. Like, and I think that whether or not you're a car fan or a Porsche fan, that is something to be pretty impressed by. I mean, they've
Yeah, I
kept,
think even not even caring about cars,
right.
it's still special.
Yeah, and these guys, they don't like these rooms are very functional. So you asked before if they were curated in a way to impress. I would say that they're 100% not. They're curated in a way that it makes it easy for them to find things. But all these shelves, the way that they work is that there's like this big sort of like crank that you like spin, and then the shelves like they're sort of split open. I'm not sure if you've seen those. They're quite common in most archives.
Yeah, I've seen those, like courthouses and
Right,
like
exactly.
I've
So
seen them on TV shows where they have all the crime stuff and all the
yeah, pretty much.
evidence and everything are shoved in boxes in these things. Yeah.
Exactly. So you walk into these rooms and they're all closed, and you see there's that big middle shelf of all the of all the models, and then they start cranking them open one by one, and it opens and you've got like race helmets and like scale models of the 962 with the Ruffman's livery, and it is a shock to the system. It's you just like, especially when you're there to cherry pick a few things, and you're just like, it's really hard to like get a grip. 'Cause
What
you
was
just
it? What was your favorite thing that you discovered that maybe you didn't even know it was there, but you turn the little knob, it opens the wall, and you're like, oh my god, look at that. What was that? If you had to pick one thing that was your favorite discovery, what was it?
I don't want to spoil it because I do want people to read it in the book, but there is a thing in there that they pulled out of nowhere because it wasn't placed in an obvious, they had to open up a few folders to get to it. But there was a thing in there called a beer contract, which was a contract between the Dr. Porsche and his engineers at the time about exceeding rev limits. And if you were to exceed those rev limits, you owe X amount of beers. The full story is in the book, but it looks so official and German, but without knowing what it said. And then they told me what it said, and it's just like them just having fun, and that was really cool. There was also, I want to say one of my favorite discoveries would have to be right towards the end. I think the second last day that we were there, we were kind of running ahead of schedule, and we had shot most of the things that were on our list. And I went to the guys in the archives and I went, hey, look, we're pretty much almost done. We've got one more day where we can shoot stuff. Is there anything else? And at this point, I think surely there isn't. Like I've seen it all. And they were kind of like scratching their chin, being like, yeah, actually, there's one more room. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay, great.
Is it like are they like sliding? Is it like a bookshelf on wheels that they're like ka-chung, 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 and then there's like a secret door and there's like cobwebs all over it, and
it was a little bit like that. And I would say that for the guys who work in the archives, like what we consider special and what they consider special are on two different like levels. Like they live with this stuff every day. So
Yeah.
it's very different for them to say, oh yeah, like this film reel from Le Mans, like yeah, whatever, I've seen it 100 times. I'm glad that you like it. But it's so it was, when we got to that second last day, and I asked them this, they were like, well, actually, across the road, there's an old building, and we keep some stuff in there. And I'm like, okay, let's go check it out. And and I've got one more day. We would shoot about 8 hours a day. So depending on what we're about to find. This was at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and depending on what we're about to find, we would have 8 hours the next day to shoot it. And it took me 2 weeks to get through the bulk of the stuff that we already shot. And so he's like, okay, all right, come across the road, and he took me inside this old building that used to be an old gymnasium for Porsche employees. He flicks on a light switch, and like right next to me is like a pile of Rothman's racing suits from the 80s, and just like a sea of shells. And I'm just thinking, holy shit. Like, what now? Like, what are we going to find here? And that, I think, some of the most significant pieces that we were able to show in the book came from that one room. What we found there were some of Porsche's very first experiments with like 3D printing. So like the V10 engine that's in the Carrera GT, they 3D printed that about this big. And that was them, messing around with 3D printing in the 90s. And it's kept there in this little cardboard box. Yeah. And we're like, holy crap, like that is so amazing. Like, not even historically speaking, but as a little piece of art, like that is just a 3D printed orange version of the Carrera GT engine. Like, amazing. We found, what else did we found? We found the original clock that was used on the Work One factory line. So like that was sitting there under a tarp, just not being neglected, but
What was built on that assembly line?
Oh, I mean, that would probably be in the early 9/11 days, or it was. So Work One, I'm not sure. I don't think they would have built early 356s there. When they migrated from Austria back to like Stuttgart. So yeah, look. So we found that there, and like we found these giant sketch.
You can understand why that guy would be like, why do you want to take pictures of a clock? Like what?
Almost.
Like what are you doing?
Right.
Like why does this clock matter?
I mean, if your everyday is to be around these objects, then yeah, for sure, that is 100% how you're going to react to that. Be like, oh yeah, that's the old factory clock. Like, sure, have at it. But to me, that was like, holy shit, like this is so incredible. And there's pictures out there where you can see that clock. Like, how amazing! Like that is. It's also amazing that they still have it. And it should be part of the museum. Like, it's just incredible.
Well, somebody saw the significance of it, right? Like, there's probably a dude, they're like redoing the factory and they're like pulling the clock down. And there's some dude named Franz being like, yeah, why don't we just save that clock over there? We got to put the clock, box it up, put it in the gymnasium. And then there's dudes that are like, what do you mean put it in the gymnasium? We love the gymnasium. And he just puts the clock in the gymnasium. There's the one guy like made it happen, right?
I mean, I got to give it to them. They kept a lot of stuff. And they can't make room for everything in those rooms, and they can't make room for everything in those in the museum. So, yeah, I would say finding that room on the second last day that we were shooting was quite, like, almost stressful, and I had to like stop myself because I got a trolley, like a literal trolley, and I was like, yep, take this, take that, and it's just. I had to stop myself. I was like, I only got 8 hours tomorrow.
Okay, so speaking of this trolley, I want to get into like maybe your process with shooting. So tell me how you went about shooting some of these things and what the process was like.
So we shot everything on site in the museum, inside where they keep all their books, pretty much. And that decision was based on the fact that we didn't want to make any of these things travel too far. So the original idea was that we were going to hire out a studio close by. Closest studio that we could find was a good 30 minutes away, and that just seemed like it was going to make things a bit clunky. And so we decided to build a studio right there in the archives. It was
There's
pretty
no way those dudes would have let you take that stuff out and take it to a studio somewhere.
right. I
No
mean,
way, no chance. Come on,
they
man.
they were definitely open to it, but I
Really?
think, yeah, they were open to it, but it would definitely have
Really?
presented.
Wow.
I mean, they would have presented a logistical, you know, it would have just been like a lot harder. So we built a studio right
Yeah.
there where they keep all their books. We made a big space for it. It was pretty, not the flashiest of like setups, but it worked really well. And we had just enough room for like 4 lights, a 2 meter backdrop, and that was it. And then we had like a little nook for my assistant, a computer, and that was it. And so the process was
Did you
that,
have kind of any rules that you set up for yourself in terms of like a creative director position? Was there like, I don't even know the term for it, but kind of like a set of guide, like, or like I guess it'd be like a brand guide almost when you're
well,
looking at all the work that you're doing and you're setting all these things up. How did you make sure that everything stayed consistent and you were able to put it together in a package? Because you're shooting like a million different types of things. It's not like
right.
you're doing a wheel catalog or just taking pictures of cars. There's such a huge variety of what you're doing. How did you make it all work and visually tell a story that makes sense?
So the concept that we fleshed out over the course of several months was that we wanted to put a big emphasis on the textures of these things, because the idea was that we were going to be taking people who had never heard of the archives or been to the archives in there, and we also wanted people to get a sense of the textures involved with these things. So photographed in the right light, all of these items are so rich in textures. Some of these things, like, we kept the dust on them. Like, we really wanted to try to make people feel like they were holding it in their hands. So that was a sort of that was an idea that the whole thing revolved around. So we we sort of went, okay, we're going to try like 3 or 4 different setups on an item, and then we're going to come in close, and that was kind of going to be it, and then we were just going to keep rotating items around, and where we saw it fit, we would capture the patina or the textures, and then we would sort of move on to the next thing. Where it sort of went and progressed was, I think, one of the biggest pivotal points in the photography's direction was to shoot things on black. So at the very last minute, I think 3 days before we went there, I added a black backdrop to the mix, because I kind of had this idea of, like, what if we're able to shoot things as if you're discovering them with a torchlight. So in the book, you'll see that there's like a 917 fan like floating in black, and it almost looks like you've spotted it with a torchlight. It kind of adds to that sense of discovery. So yeah, we had to come up with a bit of a schedule on how to shoot things. I think the schedule was that we would shoot 10 to 12 items a day, and we had about 20 minutes of each items. So so we kept to that really strict schedule, but we also gave ourselves plenty of wiggle room to mess around with lighting. So, like, you'll see it in inside the book, that little 3D scale model of the Carrera GT motor that's made of resin, and we took our time to figure out, like, how can we show what this thing is made out of without, and we try to play around with the lighting. And I think the shot that we ended up picking is a shot where the light is directly behind the motor, like shining through. And so we gave ourselves plenty of wiggle room to play around with the lights, play around with, how do we show these things? Because as someone who's put books before, I know that if you see too much of the same thing, it's going to feel repetitive and dull. So we really tried to make sure that every 10 pages or so, you really got to see something in a different light. But the whole thing revolved around being able to capture.
Yeah, that's incredibly difficult to kind of keep like a similar style and not have it be redundant and repetitive.
Yeah,
I love what you're saying about the textures and making it what you did is you made it about the reader, right? You made it about the reader, you made it about the viewer, and I think that's a huge challenge. Rather than making it about you guys experiencing what you were able to experience. And I love talking about your experience here, but as the book, making it about the person viewing it, that's an incredible task and very difficult. What do you think was the biggest challenge of everything? What was the hardest part and the thing you're most proud to have overcome?
I mean, shooting it was in itself quite difficult, and thankfully I had help when I was there. You know, a huge sort of shout out to the guys who helped, Nat and Chris and all those guys. But I think the biggest challenge would have to be to come home and to recalibrate, and then to look at. I think we walked away with like 12,000 images or something like that, and then to go, okay, like now this needs to be a single body of work that takes people into the archives. So that is something that I feel we overcame pretty well. I don't know. There were a lot of challenges with this book. None of it was so bad that it almost stopped it, but I would say that there were a lot of challenges that had to be sort of overcome, especially in a creative sense. But I think to come home with all these images and then to try to make them all feel the same, the editing process in itself took a long time, and then to edit everything.
So what you're saying is you didn't just grab the first photo, edit it, select all of the photos, and just hit
No.
sync, right? You had to. It's a
I
little more
wish.
complicated
No,
than that.
this was definitely one of the most complicated editing jobs that I've ever done. Especially when you're trying to, keep some sort of consistency across, all these pictures. It's definitely quite tricky. So I would say if I had to cherry pick one challenging challenge out of the whole thing, I would say to come home with that many pictures and then to be like, okay, we're going to scrap that one and keep this one, and and that's pretty tough because there's stuff that obviously didn't make the cut, and that's always a tough call to make when you're doing that editing process.
Do you think you shot too much? Did you
No, I
shoot too
think
much out of like worry when you were there?
no, not at all. If anything, I I almost wish that I shot more. I almost wish that I had more time. But the body of work that we came away with, I think, is pretty spot on. I think for a sort of general introduction to the archives and what's in there, you're really going to get the best stuff, and you're going to get the stuff that most people don't get to see. If you're a journalist and you go to these guys at the Porsche Museum and you're privileged enough to have a tour of the archives, I can guarantee you that there's stuff in this book you're not going to get to see in the main rooms of the archives. So we were extremely privileged with the access that we got given, and the guys in the archives sensed that they really appreciated what we wanted to do, and they really did not hold back. They were just like, yep, whatever you guys need, you can shoot it. It was just kind of getting access to the right
Yeah,
stuff.
that's awesome to have that kind of backing and help from those dudes. What do you think was your favorite object? Whether it's a paper, whether it's a helmet, or maybe it was, somebody's race suit, Derek Bell's Rothman suit just laying on the floor. Like, what is it like? What did you find? And what would you have, I guess, look at it this way. What would you have snuck into your carry-on luggage on your way home if you could have taken it home with you?
Ooh, good question. I'd say the 917 race fan, especially because that was a race to use fan. So there's a picture in there of a 917 fan that was, used like during Le Mans, and it failed, and they kept it for like research. And historically, it doesn't have it didn't win any races, or it's not like, it wasn't, it's not that significant. But man, does it look cool. Like, it looks freaking awesome. When you hold one, and you're like, it's like, I was actually starstruck. And I've seen 917 fans in 917s, but I don't know, there's something about holding one by itself that's like, wow, that's really, really cool. That is just it's just fiberglass. It's just amazing. It's so super cool. So, but I don't know. Look,
why do you think that why does this matter? Like, why is this important? Like, why is what you did matter? Why does the archives matter? I don't want to make it about why does Porsche matter, but I'm just wondering why this type of process is important to you.
I think the thing that really humbled me um, in the archives was really realizing that um, there's a real sort of like human story behind Porsche, and that it was created by people who really believed in it, and that it really all began out of just that pure drive to it's that is it was almost a pure drive to just make things better at a time where things were hard to make better, in terms of like talking about cars. And you and I know this, like owning all Porsches, like these cars have no right being that good and being that old, like so it's I mean mine's pretty good, yours is quite troublesome from what I see, but you know um,
Hey, I've
I,
got there's the troublesome part is not a Porsche part on my car.
yeah, right.
It's an aftermarket carburetor that someone tried to make better. So to be fair, it's not Porsche's fault, I guess.
No, but I think being there, like you really, when you open up all the old notebooks from the engineers, and you really get a sense that this is a human story, and that that's really important to sort of cherish and to almost preserve, because I feel like this is the kind of stuff that we're drifting further and further away from as a society, and that's to really is to come together for a single cause, and to really make the best of it. And I think that's really essentially what Porsche was about in those early days. They all believed in something, and it was all just done by pen and paper, and it was all done out of pure grit. And I think there's an amazing story there that needs to be preserved and needs to be told. So I think that's what's really important about it, and it's something that I think we captured in this book. You really look at so many, like even some of these early like scale models of prototypes, and it's all sanded by hand. It's all just like someone sat there and sanded this thing until it was done, until it was finished. And that is something that's becoming more and more rare these days. Everything, nowadays you want to make a scale model of something that big, you go and get it 3D printed, and you get it, like there is nobody who's going to sit there and send this thing by hand. So you really, the beginning of Porsche was really done out of pure grit, done out from people who really believed in it. And I think that's, there's something really like romantic about that almost.
Yeah, I think that mentality and that enigmatic nature of where Porsche was and where they came from is kind of why it's loved today. I think it's a very special circumstance, and there's a lot of manufacturers that have their own special circumstances too.
Yes. I mean,
I think Porsche is special in that way.
Porsche's not alone in that department. Like there's older brands that were around, and that there's plenty of brands out there that are older than Porsche. But I think in general, it's important to preserve and to tell the stories of people who really sat there and designed something out of just like sketching it on paper. I think that's something quite remarkable about that. I mean, to
in that vein, what other if you could visit another archive, what other manufacturer would you want to see the archive for? I've got mine in my mind. I know where I would go immediately.
Okay.
And it might be a little uncommon, but where would you go? Like what's yours? What's your archive of choice after this?
Well, funnily enough, when I was in Germany, in Stuttgart, doing this project, I visited the Mercedes Museum, which is a must for any automotive fan. Even if you don't like cars, I think it's an incredible. Like the building itself is quite amazing, and that Mercedes-Benz pretty much invented the car. So I would say that would be right there on my list. That would be where I would go next, and that would be. I mean,
I'm all over Alfa Romeo, man. Like the
Alfa
early
would be
days of
amazing.
Alfa Romeo. Ooh,
Yes,
all
absolutely.
that racing back then, way before Ferrari. Ooh, that's where I think that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That all the Pirelli archives. From what I actually know, the Pirelli archives are meant to be quite amazing. So I would put Mercedes and Pirelli right up there in terms of who I want to go to next. But my heart lies with Porsche. I'm a Porsche guy at heart, so I would happily go.
Okay, so
back.
speaking of like being a Porsche guy, and I'm sorry we have a little bit of a delay. If it sounds like I'm talking over you, it's not on purpose. I promise. Where did your love for Porsche come from? Was it your father? Like where does this start for you? Like getting your first Porsche and your dad and everything.
So this is my old man
Oh, he's showing
when
us a photo here.
when he was around 27. And my old man is the reason why I got into Porsches in the first place. My dad was a Porsche trained mechanic who ran his own workshop. When I was a kid, those cars were always around. To the point where I didn't think they were special. I just was like, yeah, it's just the cars that dad just works on. Then you know,
Hmm.
then I grew up a little bit and realized, well, these are pretty awesome cars. But I would say that like right there, this guy right here is really the guy who sort of planted the seed, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, and a lot of people who I deeply respect and admire, love the brand. So there's a connection there. But it's just one of those things, you pick your poison, and it just feels right. And I think that's just what it is with Porsche. Like for me, it's when I got into cars, I really was trying to like cherry pick and really kind of pick what it is that I wanted to be into. Like I was never a JDM guy, but I always did like classic cars, and it just kind of came full circle when I realized that I like Porsches. And I was like, hang on, my dad was like, is a Porsche guy, like who worked on Porsches, and I was like, yeah, it all makes sense now.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's
So how did the thing with being a creative director start out? I know that you worked with Nevin, a good friend of both of ours, at
Right.
Deus. Is that where it started, or where did this, creative director life begin, and how?
Well, I'm much more of a photographer than a creative director, but I do creative direction on a
Not
lot of.
anymore. I
Well,
mean, look at this book that you've created and what you've done with Type 7. I wouldn't. I mean, you've done an
I can't.
incredible job. I'm just trying to find
Thank
out
you.
where it began.
Thank you. Well, I can't take all the credit for Type 7. There's an incredible, dedicated team behind the whole thing. Nat Twist,
For sure.
Ted, all those guys. They all help to make what it is. But yeah, I would say it just kind of came over a course of, you know, like with creative direction, it really comes down to being well calibrated to things that you think are good, and then finding how to put a voice to that. So, I've spent most of my life, fortunate enough, or most of my creative life, sorry, most of my creative life working alongside people who have amazing creative voices, and I've learned to sort of like pick up on, what makes those voices good. Um, and yeah, I think it's just what it comes down to is really having a good antenna for, what that stuff is, and what makes you tick, and how to put a voice to that, and also how to find the right people to work with that are going to help you bring those ideas to life. And that is so much of what's happened with this book is it wasn't just me saying, hey, the archives sound really cool, I want to go in there. Really, it came to be because there was the right team of people working behind this thing that helped to make it what it is. So whilst I may have been heavily involved in sort of like steering the ship, it really comes down to having the right crew, and that's exactly what's happened with this book here. There's a perfect example of that.
So how did you find your place in this world? Like, how did it start? What was your first paid gig when you're like, wow, this actually, I could be a photographer? How did this
I have no idea
begin?
what my first paid gig was. I don't think I have no idea, but
It's
the
selling lemonade on the
yeah,
side of the Outback.
my first job was not photography, that's for sure. But the if I had to really trace it back, I would say that so my mother was a used to write reviews for films, and so she was a movie critic, essentially, and which meant that her little home office was just flooded with press releases from movies and advanced copies of movies that were coming out. And it was just kind of always at an early age I became very well aware of like framing, and having things be in a sort of visual format.
Did you watch movies with her? Did you
Oh yeah,
screen stuff with her, and did she talk to you about what was
yeah.
going on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've
Ah,
got
this movie's trash. I don't like the like. How did that?
no. I mean, my mom was. I mean, I've got to give I've got to give her credit because she would show me things that I don't think kids my age should have been watching. I mean, I remember watching Jackie Brown with my mom when I was like, God, fuck, I was still in primary school, no doubt. She was like, I've got to review this film. I've got an advanced copy here. Do you want to sit down? Like, I would, I would watch Goodfellas and Jackie Brown, and so I had a pretty good
Yeah.
cinematic upbringing, and that instilled in me a very visual sense for things. And I carried that through to photography. I thought that maybe I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I kind of had access to a photographic camera, and to me, framing things, like whether it was still or motion, it was all the same. I just thought it was really really fun. So that would be where it all began. Really, was really just having that ability to capture the world around me in a way that makes sense to me, and just playing around. And it was just kind of like a love affair that I had with photography at a very early age that sort of guided me to where I am right now. And yeah, I
What do
would
you think
say
makes made you good back then? Like, why did someone take notice of Thomas Walk? What was it about you?
I don't
I know it's hard
know.
to talk about yourself sometimes,
It's
but
very very hard.
like, what is it about like your work that you think people were attracted to? You know, you ended up at Deus at a time. I'm imagining, if you were there when Nevin was there, it
Right.
was kind of a fledgling thing, right? Deus wasn't what it is today. It was just this grassroots, you know, thing where Deus would support other places, support other events, and it was a lot different than it is. But how did you end up on that team? Because that's a very if I think of the people that were there, they're all very good. They're all very talented. What was it about Thomas Walk that put you in the pool with those people?
No idea. But so for the record, Nevin worked in the US and I worked in Sydney, which is where Deus is based.
Uh,
So
well,
we
I just
were,
imagine all the stories Nevin told me about Australia, so I assume that you
yeah,
guys
exactly. Oh,
worked
I
together
mean,
when he was there.
we definitely worked together and crossed paths, and I had the pleasure of going over to the States and spending time with Nevin. Um, but I would say the Deus chapter of my life really began out of sheer luck. I was getting into motorcycles at the time, and I had a good friend who worked there in the creative team, and they were looking for an in-house photographer, and I just happened to be very enthusiastic and looking for a job, and and it was just seemed like it was a place that I believed in, and I really wanted to be part of that team. I later came to realize that, aside from all the cool stuff that Des was doing, it was an incredible creative environment to be a part of. And those were extremely formative years for me. I spent 7 years there working alongside some of the most talented and creative people I've been lucky to know, including the creative director and co-founder, Kabi Tockwell, who drew this little guy right here. There's a picture of a 356 that's hanging behind me. Um, and yeah, those were extremely formative years, and I learned a lot about who I was.
How did it change you? Well, if you look at when you started to when you left, what were your biggest takeaways from that? How did it form you? What did it do?
I would say that it really, first of all, it definitely changed my perception on photography, and if I really got to stretch my legs creatively on the with photography and learning how that all sort of made sense to me, and really helping me find my voice with photography. But also, I got to really learn a ton of other stuff that I probably would never have picked up on if I had stayed a freelance photographer and just made money taking photos. I got to the thing with the thing with working there, and like you said, it was at that point for quite a long time, it was a grassroots thing. Is that people wore many hats. So I was responsible for taking photos of stuff, but every now and again, I would need to chip in and lay out a catalog. So by doing these things, you learn how to get comfortable with InDesign, and get comfortable with like Illustrator, and you get to really dip your toes in a lot of disciplines that would otherwise never get a chance to, have a reason to.
Did you have any
And
formal
like I
discipline
said,
in
I
this stuff,
think
or
just
was it
being
kind of trial
around
by
really
fire?
creative people was just so helpful in terms of finding my voice and try to figure out what it is that I like about, you know, like being creative. Um, I also came to realize that
Was there any of this? Was any of this stuff that you were learning, like InDesign, Photoshop, Lightroom, cameras? Did you have any formal training, or was it
none.
basically just trial by fire? Like, here, you got to make this catalog. Here's InDesign. Go. Was it? You have any
It was
formal
a real,
training at all?
no, not really. Out of high school, I just was like I was a flunky in high school. I paid barely any I paid no attention, especially when discovering photography at kind of an early age, around when I was like 13 or 14. I was just like, screw high school and screw learning stuff. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna do photography, which is
This
pretty
sounds familiar.
short-sighted. But then out of high school, I
I
reached
don't know
out.
what it was about my art teachers and like at the school, like the photography teacher, the art teacher when I was there.
Right.
For some reason, they would let me skip all my classes and I would just go to the art room. I would sit there, I would draw, I would
That's awesome.
color, I would develop photos, I'd throw clay on the pottery wheel, I'd grab the airbrush, and I would spend 3-4 hours. I'd go to school in the morning, go to my locker, put my shit away, and I wouldn't even show up for first period. I would sit in the art room all the way till lunch, and then maybe I would just leave school. I don't know. The art teachers they had to have known what I was doing and where I was.
Dude, that's
I was
amazing.
also a flunky, dude. Like I barely graduated. It was like a D minus 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 minus. Okay, we'll let this guy through. Get his diploma, get him out of here. I
Right,
barely
exactly.
graduated.
I only finished high school because my mom said I had to. She was like, "You can do whatever you want in life. Just please have a high school diploma." And I was like, "All right, sure, fine." I don't think I even went to my graduation. That's how much of a pissed off teenager I was. I was like, the day that I finished my last exam and it was in the can, I was like, I'm never showing up to school ever again. So, um, look, I was just a
Why
kind
were you
of,
so pissed off? What was going on?
I have no idea. It was just I listened to a lot of, a lot of Metallica, a lot of
Just
Slayer.
testosterone.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, dude,
I was just a straight,
Thomas,
yeah.
do you know what my nickname was in high school?
No, something to do with music, I'm guessing.
My It was Metallica was my actual nickname
No way.
in high school. I had a different Metallica shirt for every day of the week. I wore a Metallica shirt every single day. I had long hair. I play guitar. If I wasn't in the art room, I'd be going to the band room with my buddies and jamming out Master of Puppets in the drum room. Man, that was
Right.
it.
That's
Man, I
amazing.
was such a fuck up, dude. I was such a fuck up.
And look at you now. It all worked out. Um,
Yeah, I'm still a fuck up. Yes.
so we're all fuck ups in our own ways. But yeah, look, that was just, I don't think there's any good reason for being, the way that I was. I think it was just a rebellious streak that I went through. And also, I also felt like I really wanted to pursue creative stuff, and school just seemed like it was in the way. And I was just like, yeah, it was just not my thing back then. I just wanted to go surf and go skate and take photos with my friends, and that's exactly what I did when I wasn't at school. And then whenever I did get pulled into school, it felt like I was doing something against my will. So I think that's just what it was. I also feel like it's almost a prerequisite to being some sort of creative. That's how you have to approach school. You've got to approach it with a sense of, you know, you got to be somewhat pissed off at it. It kind of fuels the fire. But yeah, out of high school.
Yeah, we're giving great advice to any kids that are listening
Yeah,
now. Yeah,
sorry,
just stay in the art room. Fuck
don't
off. Just barely graduate. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's no problem.
I
So
def-
you're basically doing a ton of work with Type7 right now, and you've
Right.
done this book, which is beautiful. And we'll leave a link in the description for everybody that's interested in the book to check the book out. And I highly encourage it. It sounds like a work of art. I can't wait for mine to get here. What's next? Like, what is the trajectory for Type7? What do you see Type7 becoming? And I've watched Type7 start. I was very, very interested in where when it started and what Ted was doing.
Right.
And then as time goes along, I start to hear about you a little bit and what you're doing, and I hear about Nat and what Nat is up to, and I kind of see it all coming together. And
Yeah.
you guys seem to be really producing extremely high quality stuff. And I don't know if that was the original inception, was to make the books. I don't know. But where are things going? Where do you want to be?
It's a good question. I
Or
think
where do you want Type 7 to be?
I think we wanted to, of course, I think we just want to be to up the stakes in terms of where we sit in the zeitgeist of the community that we've grown. So I think that's ultimately we want to try to grow the community. We also want to try to be more present in a physical sense. So making the books that we've been releasing across that in the last 4 years, I should say, have been very pivotal in making that happen. So it really began as like an Instagram thing, but I think now the next step is to do more of is to really grow the community that we've helped to nurture. So to do lots more like physical events, be part of more physical events. We're going to keep bringing out more books, and yeah, I think that's kind of the long term answer is to try to make is to grow the community that we've helped to grow. And it really is an amazing community when you.
So,
really
I mean, physical sense, I think instantly of like a particular rally. I mean, I'd love to have you out.
Yeah. Well,
You
even
know, if you
Senator
could get
for
here, you can ride with me.
hell yeah. I mean, it's I'm only in Australia. It's only like a 20-hour flight away, so no problem. But I would love to.
I've got routes in. So I have this dream of driving around Australia and through the middle. My wife says I'm not allowed to drive through the middle. She's
Under the middle.
absolutely positive that I'm going to die if I drive through the middle of Australia. I'm going to get
You
murdered and chopped up into little pieces.
don't do the middle. Don't do the middle. I could definitely vouch
Why
for it.
not? It seems like it would be so.
Dude, it's a whole lot of nothing with straight roads. You're gonna be pretty bored. Um, but hey,
So I want to write an article. I think that this is the thing. I think curvy roads are overrated.
wow.
I think that there's a case to be made for the straight road and the loneliness. Some of the best driving I've ever done is in Nevada,
Right.
Highway 50, or around like Tonopah and all these different places that are abandoned in Nevada, where you are utterly alone. So alone that if you get out of your car and you stand on the roof, you see absolutely nothing.
Right.
Nothing. And it's the vanishing point of being able to see for so far. When you're on a curvy road, you're in the forest, you're in the mountains, you get out of your car, you're kind of with everything within 50 yards, 100 yards is like you're kind of encapsulated in this little spot, right? You're in this little cove, this little box of beauty, right? You get out into some of these places where it is absolutely nothing as far as your human capability, as far as the sense of your eyes are able to see as a human being, you can see it all, like as far as it goes, the vanishing point into the distance, and you're the only one that's able to see it at that given time. It's so magical and it's so special. And I don't know if you've driven out I'm sure you have been out in Australia where you can feel that and see that. I mean, maybe across Australia is like maybe a little too much of it, but I really love that nothing, that just absolute nothing with the vanishing point of it.
Yeah. Look, I can somewhat sympathize for that. It's a pretty romantic view of of a straight road, but I don't get to drive my car a whole lot. So whenever I do get to drive it, I want to have as much fun as I can possibly can having, being in that car. So to be on a straight road is definitely not my idea of it. But I'm definitely picking up what you're saying, and I think that's a point of view that I would happily entertain. But nothing beats a good bit of road that and that you can you really get drive on. Like to me, that's ultimately that's really what it's all about for me. But yeah, interesting point.
Yeah, I think the contrast of it helps too. You got that beautiful road. Let's say you're in, like when I drive across the West, I start out here in Minneapolis, go through Nebraska, which smells like poop, and it's very flat and very hot every time I'm there.
Right.
That's all it is. It's like poopy and hotty. That's all it is. And then you get to like Colorado and it starts to get beautiful. And then of course I get into the great American West, like Utah and stuff, and you get into Utah and that's my favorite place to drive.
Right.
And it's very like different biomes and it's not a lot of straight roads. It's more sweeping and stuff like that. And usually I'm on my way to California and you leave Utah in the morning and then all of a sudden you just get flung out of a slingshot into the nothing. And I think it's maybe that journey that makes it okay. Like
Yeah,
it's the
yeah, of
contrast of where I was to where I am now and
course.
the difference of it.
Yeah, I guess, if you're going to drive through the center of Australia, you're not really going to get that change of landscape for quite a long time. So that'd be quite a different experience. Um, but I can definitely
There's
understand
always
that.
Tasmania too, right? I've got like a route in Tasmania. Like I'd love to do an Overcrest rally in Tasmania. It's like my goal.
Tasmania,
It's on my 5-year plan. Like I'd love
Tasmania
to go there.
is nuts. It is. I would say do that first. Tasmania is big enough that you can really drive it for a few days, and you could do the whole thing in like 2 3 days. You could do the outskirts in 2 3 days for sure. But then there's the inside. Tasmania is
Yeah.
incredible. East coast of Tassie, which I've done, is that those have to be some of the best driving roads I've seen in Australia, no doubt. So incredible.
How do you get there? What's it like for like getting a ferry to, like
So there's
can I
only
obviously I'm not shipping a car to Tasmania.
yeah. So if you
Like
were to
from here, I mean, like on a, like in a shipping container and putting it on a boat and sending it over. I've got to get it to Sydney first and then
You've
what's
got
it
to get
like?
you've got to get to Melbourne. Once upon a time, you used to be able to catch a boat called the Spirit of
Melbourne.
Tasmania from Sydney. That doesn't happen anymore. Now, if you want to catch that ferry, you've got to go to Melbourne. So you would have to go to Melbourne, get your car on a ferry, and then do I think it's like 4 or 5 hours. Don't quote me on that, but it's a pretty short trip, and then you're there, and the last time that I was there and I did the East Coast, I was doing it in a crappy rent a car. And I just remember thinking, oh, what would I give to have my 911? Like, just the most amazing roads. So incredible. But yeah, that's what you would have to do if you were.
That was me on the Nürburgring in a Mercedes A-Class diesel, getting passed by everything, going, "Why am I driving this
Dude,
the
that sounds a
biggest
lot better
piece of
than what,
shit
what we,
ever?"
that sounds a lot better than what we had. We had the equivalent of an Opel in Australia. It's called like a Holden. And it's just, anyway, don't want to talk about it. It's sad. But yeah, those roads are incredible.
Is that bad? Jeez.
No, I
My
mean,
my Australia geography is really quite bad because obviously
yeah.
Sydney is very far from Tasmania and Melbourne.
No,
Melbourne
not
is
really.
right there.
So
What's it cost to get your car over there?
to get from Melbourne to Tassie, I don't know.
Tasmania, yeah.
Yeah, probably a couple $100. Not that much. It's not that
Oh,
steep.
that's not bad.
Yeah, some people do that trip once a week. Some people work in Melbourne and live in Tassie, and they'll do it once a week. Like, it's really not that big a deal. You can definitely do it. It's not too expensive. I got a bunch of friends who have a rally, and they go over there once a year, and they just all convoy down to Melbourne and hop on the ferry, and they have 3 4 days of just driving some of the most amazing roads in Australia. And I think, back to your point, that's kind of what makes Tassie.
Here's the question.
Yeah, go.
So I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
here's the question. If I were to say, hey, we're doing an Overcrest rally in Tasmania, would enough people want to go that we could do it?
Oh yeah.
I could maybe have like maybe 15 people would ship their car there. You think we could do it? You think we could make it happen?
You'd get enough Aussies interested to do it. You wouldn't have to ship any cars. But yeah, it's to go to Tassie is on. There's a lot of people who make it part of their regular schedule to go to Tassie and spend 3 4 days driving. That is part of, and I think there is an event. I'm not sure if it was on this year, but the Targa Tasmania is a thing where they block off public roads in the middle of Tassie, and they have a full on stage rally. And back to your earlier point about the change of scenery, it's really what makes Tassie so incredible to drive in, because you go from mountain ranges to beaches, and there's a lot of change in scenery. It's a very dramatic. It's probably, a lot of people say that Tasmania is a poor man's New Zealand, because it's kind of what it looks like. It looks a lot like New Zealand. So yeah, I would 100% vouch for you to do that. That would be incredible. I'll definitely
Okay, so
come.
I'm gonna feel like I'm in because I'm gonna call it Tassie from now on. So
Yeah.
I'm making steps to knowing what I'm talking about. To do
Australians
the
think
Overcrest rally in Tassie.
we're pretty lazy. We tend to shorten everything and just add like a Y or IE to it. Yeah, that's just the way we operate.
Well, that's exactly what you'd expect out of a prison state, which is
Oh,
we pretty much just over here. We just assume you guys are, everybody is the descendant of like a murderer. Is kind of how we perceive Australia.
I mean, yeah. I don't want to get too much into that, but yeah, maybe we definitely. I would say if you were to trace the root back, there's definitely a lot of that for sure. But yeah, Tasmania is a must, and I think even if you were to come here on a holiday and you just do like a recce on what it's like to go there, you'll fall in love. It is really incredible.
A recce.
Yeah.
Wow, recce and Tassie.
A recce and Tassie.
Is
that a thing? Is that a word you guys use?
I mean, I've always wanted to go. We had a guy that came on the podcast, and he was a dude that like he went and he like just drove around places on a scooter.
Right.
And he wrote a book about it. And it's a really cool episode. I can't remember his name because after 500 episodes, your brain gets full.
Have you done 500
and he said that there was a market, and this was pre-COVID, but there was a market in Sydney or Melbourne for used cars. Right. And it was at the bottom of a parking ramp. And you would just walk in there, and there'd be dudes sitting there being like, yeah, this is my Holden whatchamacallit. I bought it to drive around in Australia, and now I'm getting out of here. And then it's there, and you could buy it. And then you would be the purveyor of the Holden. You would buy the Holden, you drive it around, and then you would bring it back to this like super secret marketplace. I got to contact that guy and see if it's a super secret Aussie marquee place. Would I call it a marquee place? Is that like how you would shorten that one?
No, you don't. Like the word has to be like a certain length for you to be able to do that. But market's just market. Okay. Yeah, that sounds. I haven't.
Here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Thomas, as a Porsche enthusiast, speaking of shortening things.
Yes.
Porsche is 2 syllables.
Correct.
How do you feel about P-car? Because P-car is also 2 syllables.
Yep.
And it seems like a total waste of time to shorten Porsche to P-car. What do you think? How do you feel?
Ooh, we have another one here in Australia. We call them porkers. So that's another one to throw.
Porker.
That's another one to throw into the ring. How do I feel about P-car? I don't mind it. I definitely feel
that's like a different name though. That's like a nickname.
It is.
That's like a nickname. That's like calling somebody Junior or something, even though their real name is Thomas. You call him Junior. Yeah. Porsche, Porker. It's almost like endearing a little bit. It's not just a shortened version of the word.
I don't feel any way about P-car. I definitely feel like it's definitely very American. I don't think I've heard it being said here, but I don't think it's very prevalent. But yeah, it's all right. It definitely doesn't rub me the wrong way. I don't feel any sort of way about it. Yeah, like P-car works. It feels slightly lazy.
No worries. No, it's just a stupid thing.
It feels a little bit lazy, slightly. But I can't talk. Like being
Thomas, is there anything else on your mind before I let you go? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about with the book, with life, anything going on?
No, look, I think to be able to come here and talk about this book that's been very close to me for now 2 years means the world. I'd like to thank everyone who helped with this book. That's Ted, Nat. I also want to thank Andy Cruz from House Industries who helped to design the package for this book. Like I said earlier, there really was a dedicated team of people that came together to put this book out there. And I'm just extremely thankful to have been able to come on and to talk about my experience making it and it's been a wild ride, and I really can't wait to hear what people think once they have it in their hands, because I do think that it's so much more than just a cover to cover book. It really is an experience in itself. And this book was created by fans and followers of Porsche. So it's not something that was created as part of a marketing exercise. It was really something that was birthed out of, really wanting to pay tribute to what Porsche is by folks who love the brand. So I'm just thank you.
I think that's the best way to do it. I think obviously this isn't like you're not expecting to sell 1 million copies of this book. This was really a passion project, and I'm really interested to see it. Like I said, the Porsche archive is an absolute enigma. It is when you look at it, it's just, you assume like you'll never get in there. You'll never be able to see it. So I'm really excited to see what you guys did. The way that it sounds like you wrote the book and photographed the book sounds incredible. I love that you're serving the viewer, serving the reader, which is something I always try to do here. I'm looking forward to it very much. Thomas, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to hang out with us.
No, you got it,
I
buddy.
cannot wait to see you on the 2024 Overcrest Rally. It's going to be good.
In Tassie.
He's got me. He's got me.
In Tassie. We're doing it in Tassie.
All right, buddy. You take care of yourself.
No, you too. Thank you, Chris. Speak soon, buddy.
Yep. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This room is real,
Thomas.
and that means the treasure is real. We're in the company of some of the most brilliant minds in history because you found what they left behind for us to find and understood the meaning of it. You did it,
Thomas.
for all of us. Your grandfather and all of us. And I've never been so happy to be proven wrong.